Good evening. Tonight we are going to be talking about the Sea Trumpet. And specifically we're going to be talking about this Sea Trumpet because this is the Sea Trumpet that I have. And this particular instrument is just a generic Chinese Sea Trumpet. I contacted a supplier off Alibaba about 3-4 years ago now, and it cost me $155, $155 US, and it is pretty much your entry-level Sea Trumpet. But before we go into the specifics of this instrument, let's just spend a moment talking about Sea Trumpets in general. Firstly, how can you tell them apart? Well, the easiest way to tell a C trumpet from a B-flat trumpet is that you will immediately notice this section here, where the tuning slide goes in, is a lot shorter than on a standard B-flat trumpet. A B-flat trumpet normally comes out a bit more, whereas a C trumpet, this looks abnormally short, and consequently the distance between the tuning slide and the bell is a little bit longer. And so if you're very familiar with B-flat trumpets, you'll see one of these and notice immediately that something's different. But other than that aesthetic quality, the rest of the instrument is very similar. This particular example takes a standard trumpet mouthpiece. It has a standard trumpet sized bell. The bell flare is a standard trumpet size, and it in fact is just 11/12 the size of a B-flat trumpet. Having a C trumpet comes with a number of pros and cons. On the pro side, or on the plus side, you've got an instrument that you can take piano music and play along and it be in tune. You don't have to transpose. Same thing goes with choral music. You can play along with a choir and you don't have to transpose. Same with violin music or other forms of music that is in the key of C, or in concert pitch I should say. You can take one of these, play the music that's written, don't have to worry about transposition or anything like that, and you'll be playing the right sounds. That is a really big benefit or bonus for playing a C trumpet. On the downside, however, if you are a B-flat trumpet player and you want to get a C trumpet, and something that I personally struggle with myself, is that you'll see a note on the page, you'll go to play that note, but it won't sound like what you're used to. If you see a C on the page and you play what you think is a C on a B-flat trumpet, it sounds a B-flat. If you take that same note and play the same fingering and everything on this, it'll sound one tone higher and you'll hear a C. And that becomes a problem if you have played B-flat instruments most of your life, because you think you know what a note's going to sound like, but it's just slightly different to throw you, at least initially, until you get used to the instrument. So that's the main downside. Trumpets in the key of C have been used historically in a lot of different forms of classical and Baroque style music. They aren't tended to be used too much these days in modern compositions, so the use cases for one of these is if you're trying to recreate or have that level of authenticity when playing some of the older classical style music, or if you're in that situation where you need to read off an instrument that plays in concert pitch and you don't want to have to transpose your part. That's where something like this comes in quite useful. Right, now that we've got some of that general stuff out of the way, let's talk about the specifics of this particular instrument. Starting with the aesthetics of the instrument and the sort of build quality, the first thing that we notice is that the main tuning slide is ludicrously loose. It is so loose that when I was sort of practicing before, it fell off. It is ridiculously loose. One of the downsides of having a tuning slide so loose is that you actually get water or spit and condensation and all those sort of lovely fluids dribbling out from the gaps around here, because it's easy for water to permeate when you're as loose as this. The first valve tuning slide has got a thumb saddle and it works acceptably. It's not particularly well lubricated, but then again this has been sitting on a shelf for 2.5 years. The third valve tuning slide has a thumb ring, and the third valve is nice and smooth. It's got just the right sort of resistance and it operates actually surprisingly well. The valves, on the other hand, are a bit of a different story. Starting with the finger buttons, we have no insets in here. We don't have any sort of mother of pearl or anything like that. It is just a plate of silver or plate of metal, and it looks alright, but it feels a little bit different if you're not particularly used to that. The valves themselves are one of the examples where you see the effects of having a cheap instrument. The quality of the threads where you screw it in are not the greatest, so you sort of have to fiddle around a little bit to get the valve to engage properly with the thread, and so that tends to be a little bit risky when it comes to the chance of actually cross-threading or stripping the thread off the valve, or at least the connections of the valve. The valves are centre sprung, and we have the spring and everything like that. The valves are made out of brass, but it's raining outside, if you couldn't tell. The valves are made out of brass and have a very thin coating of some sort of silvery coloured substance, whether that be silver or nickel or Manel or Chinesium or anything like that. It's got some sort of substance on them. The valves work reasonably well. There's no major complaints there. But my biggest problem with the valves, other than the fact that trying to thread them on is a problem, is that you have to do the valves up as tight as you can possibly go, otherwise they'll click. So the second valve is as tight as it goes. The first valve, I've put it on as tight as my fingers can go and it doesn't click. But if I were to loosen it all, it would then start clicking. So ideally you could put some bigger felts on the inside of them and improve that, and make that a little bit better, but it's something that is something I'm going to mention about this particular instrument. Of course, when buying cheap instruments, your mileage may vary. What I experience with this, you may not experience with your instrument. So that's just a bit of an overview of this instrument. If you've got $155 US or thereabouts to spend on a Sea Trumpet and you want something that is acceptable, then I've got no issues with sort of suggesting that this might be an option. There's no major intonation issues, no major tuning issues. It does require a little bit of work if you're going to use it as a fairly frequent instrument, but for the most part I've gotten what I've paid for, and for the one or two times that I have needed to use it, it's worked for me. So we'll finish with another little piece of music just to further give an example of the sound of this instrument, and thank you very much for watching.